Number 1. I grew up as an only child in a small house in the Hollywood Hills before housing prices in the neighborhood skyrocketed. My parents were not the helicopter type, perhaps because they themselves grew up in a small, safe town in the Midwest in the 1950s, 1960s. I spent my childhood roaming the neighborhood and the hills, playing imaginary little stories through my head. I had a couple of local friends over the years, but generally there were no kids in our neighborhood. It wasn't the place to raise children. It wasn't a great part of Hollywood at the time, and the 101 freeway was quite literally in our backyard. Most of the streets were unpaved, and there were no sidewalks. Mostly, it was populated with aging hippie types and struggling actors. So 90% of the time, I played and wandered alone. One day, my mother picked me up from school and we headed home. Once through the door, we did the usual. Kicked our shoes off, shouldered off school and work bags, greeted the cats, and attended to the blinking red light on the answering machine. I think I so vividly remember our usual little routine that day because what cut through it next was so unusual and unsettling and rang in such sharp contrast to the comfortable little world I'd always felt so safe within. I was maybe 8 or 9 at the time, and this was definitely a moment of innocence lost. There was only one message, a man's voice, grinning, invading the little house.
I would love so much to scare your daughter.
That laugh, so maniacal sounding and exaggerated. It would have sounded like the guffaw of a villain in some movie, but it didn't, despite the obvious theatrics. It didn't sound that way because it was real. It was far scarier than any fiction. The laughter was loud, long, and drawn out. I didn't even hear the end of it. My mom hit stop on the player, cutting him off abruptly. But his presence still hung heavily in the air. My little world had been irrevocably disturbed. I remember my mother playing it off very casually and telling me that it was nothing and that I shouldn't be afraid. And I recall how shocking her composure was. How was that nothing? Shouldn't I be afraid? Why wasn't she afraid? Looking back now, I realized she was putting up a front for my benefit. Whenever I've brought this up to her now, as an adult, she seems to sort of vaguely remember it and goes, "Oh yeah, I don't know what that was, just someone playing a prank." I'm shocked, honestly, that my parents didn't go to the police with it. That's not what I would consider a prank. To this day, I think my mom is still trying to downplay it. She grows uncomfortable when I bring it up. Anyway, after that incident, I could never really fully enjoy myself when I was out in the neighborhood by myself. I always wondered if that man was somewhere in the hills, watching. Number 2. So this first started happening to me when I was 14 or 15. We always ordered from the same Chinese food place, my girlfriends and I maybe once or twice a week. We loved Chinese food. We always had the same delivery guy. Being young, naive girls, we were overly friendly, appreciative for the delivery man who brought our favorite food. One day, it was just me and one of my girlfriends, and we ordered. My dad wasn't home because he always worked late, but I was old enough to be home alone, so it wasn't usually an issue. My doorbell rang, and I went to answer with exact cash, including tip, and said thank you, and we were all set. He said,
"Let me just come in and count it quick."
I said, "Oh well, it's $25, whatever, with tip. We're all set." And he kind of walked towards the door, getting closer, as if he was just going to come in. Luckily, Dad walked in the back door right at that second and asked whose car was in the driveway. and the man just left. We didn't say anything because we were scared my dad would be mad. Fast forward maybe a year later. Same thing happened to my friend, the same one who was over that night, but at her house. She called her mom crying, and her mom called the Chinese place. The guy got fired because they had gotten other complaints, so we thought we were in the clear. Fast forward again, maybe 5 years down the road. I go to this 24-hour gym. Half of the time it's unstaffed, but you need a key to get in, a swipe key. I was alone, and it was maybe 8:30 at night. And who walks in? Him. He tried talking to me, and I left very quickly. Told my friends I saw him. Whatever, just a coincidence. Now I'm a 20-year-old. I work with my dad full-time. We were driving around and had to stop for gas. We own a company together, and our company truck is very vivid and has our last name on it because it's part of the company name. I go inside and grab a bottle of water while my dad pumps the gas. He's in the gas station and says to me, "You look like someone I know." I say, "Nope," paid, walked out, and said, "Dad, let's go." I get in the passenger seat, and this guy goes up to my dad and says,
Smith. Do you know a Samantha Smith that lives on School Street?
He knew my first and last name, remembered my address from 6 to 7 years earlier. My dad remembered immediately who he was and told him to leave me alone or he would call the cops. We didn't know his name or who he was, so it was just a threat to hopefully get him to stop being a creep. I never would have told this man my name. I can only guess he knew it from me paying with a card or stalking. Who knows? Then 2 years ago, I'm now 24, almost 25. I went to the grocery store early, like 7 a.m. early. I couldn't sleep and just wanted to get some errands out of the way on a Saturday. I grabbed my stuff and went to check out on one of 3 to 4 lanes open. The store was dead. I was like, sweet, I'll be in and out. Who walks up to pay right behind me at the register with all the others open? Chinese delivery man. That was my last encounter. Please, Chinese delivery man, may we never meet again. Number 3. I started leasing a condo in 2010 and lived there for roughly 4 years. To understand the story, I have to explain the location layout of my condo. First and foremost, in the area I was in, my condo was considered a carriage house or back house. Basically, what that means is my unit was detached from all other units within the small condominium complex. My unit also sat above the complex's water heater and very small laundry facility. Therefore, I was on the second floor. In short, my condo was basically comparable to living in a very small house that is on a second floor, so I had no one above me, beside me, or below me. It was a freestanding unit, and if I wanted to visit my neighbors' units, I had to walk down my stairs and go through a gate. My unit had one singular set of stairs, which led straight up to a small little landing, balcony, and then of course the entrance to my unit. There was only one singular entrance and exit and no additional balconies. My condo was only accessible through the alley, meaning you couldn't even get to my unit without being in the alley. The alley is where all tenants facing north on my street parked, and all tenants facing south on the street behind us parked. My unit had both a wooden door with a bottom lock and deadbolt, as well as a screen door that also had a lock. The screen door lock was totally useless because you could still open the screen door if you pulled hard enough. I had been living in this condo for about 2 years when this occurred and never experienced anything remotely similar prior to or after the event. One night, I go outside to my little landing to smoke a cigarette. I know, blah blah, so bad for me. I've since quit, so no comments, please. It's nighttime, therefore it's dark outside, but our alley is pretty lit up, so I can see everything pretty well. I'm screwing around on my phone, leaning over the railing, and I look down into the alley. I see this youngish guy walking down the alley near my unit. No big deal. Occasionally, there would be random people that walked in our alley from the bus stop, but they never just stopped and stared. They continued on, and I had never felt threatened or concerned, as I lived in a pretty prestigious area. However, this guy stops abruptly and just stares at me. I mean, the dude literally just stopped dead in his tracks, doesn't say a word, and just stares up at me. At this point, we are making eye contact. I can't explain why or how I felt the way I did when we made eye contact, and to this day, I had never felt the same emotions that came over me, but I just could sense that he was evil and no less than 10 feet away. His eyes had zero emotions. It looked as if he was staring at me like a lion would its prey before the kill. I had never seen this man or interacted with this man in my life. And again, just to reiterate, I don't know why, I don't know how, but my body and mind just knew he was evil. After making eye contact, my heart was beating rapidly, so I put out my cigarette and went inside. I didn't want to make it seem extremely obvious because, well, I didn't know his intentions. I locked my screen door, locked my big wooden door, and called one of my neighbors to see if he could go check out what this dude was doing. Neighbor answers but says,
I'm not home right now, but I'll be pulling down the alley in a couple minutes, so I can see if he's still there.
For him to park, he has to park in the alley by my condo. At this point, I'm standing in my kitchen, which is about 20 feet from the door, and I start to hear footsteps on my stairs. I then hear my screen door attempting to be opened. Open! I know it's him. I wasn't expecting anyone that evening. I soon found out that when stuff goes down and fight or flight is supposed to kick in, I apparently freeze. No grabbing a knife for me, so needless to say, if anything happens in the future, I'm screwed. At this point, I don't know how long it's been from a time standpoint, but honestly, time does stand still when you're in fear. All I know is this man has gotten my screen door open, and who knows what's next. I'm preparing for the worst. I can hear Save Your Neighbor screaming,
What are you doing?
The man, according to Save Your Neighbor, flew down the stairs and booked it through the alley. Save Your Neighbor tried to catch up, but Save Your Neighbor was also a bit older. I don't know what he was going to do or what could have happened that evening had my neighbor not come home, but I am honestly so very lucky he was already on his way back home. I lived at that condo for another 1.5 years and never saw that man again. But please, Lord, let us never, ever meet.